How's it going, everyone? It's been a minute since I've done a video here on the channel, and that's for a few reasons. One, I went on vacation to the beautiful islands of Hawaii and spent about a week there soaking up the sun, getting sunburnt, you name it, sightseeing and just laying out on the beach. And two, I've been traveling a lot for work recently and been very busy with work and 3D printing at work and 3D printing very cool metal parts at work, or at least trying to. But I wanted to do a video again to kind of get the momentum back going on the channel. And the video I thought I'd talk about today is the idea of if it's worth it for someone like yourself and like me to go to an insurance auction and purchase a slightly damaged or really damaged car for their fun project. I just got done with a major repair on this car, basically dropping the whole subframe out of the car, replacing the subframe because it was cracked either from the accident or from being at the auction yard with the forklifts and whatnot, and then also replacing the harmonic balancer, which is really just maintenance that could happen even on a perfectly mint condition car. So in today's video I want to do a deep dive into talking about a few different points that some are obvious, some are not so obvious, on things to consider if you're looking at possibly purchasing or bidding on a car at a salvage auction for your next project. Okay, so getting right into it, a little bit of background for those that are newer to the channel and aren't aware. I purchased this 2001 C5 Corvette 6-speed manual base coupe in November 2018 from Insurance Auto Auctions Incorporated, IAAI. That's one of the two most popular auction sites for insurance cars, the other one being Copart. I bid on this car and it had about 55,000 miles on it. Now it doesn't have much more on it now since I've mostly been just wrenching on it. But I bid on the car sight unseen. The car is actually up in Missoula, Montana, and so I really bid on the car. I took a little bit of a risk on it and only used the Carfax to go off of, and actually called some of the shops that popped up on the Carfax. So my winning bid for this car was right about $5,000, and after all the auction fees and shipping from Montana down here to SoCal, it was right about $7,000 to get into this car, which was pretty good considering it's harder to find one of these with a 6-speed manual. Most of them are with the automatic transmission, and one that didn't have over 100,000 miles on it. As soon as the car was delivered to me and I pulled it off of the trailer, the repair saga began. Initially it was something that I couldn't see also in the auction listing. So there was a little, about thumb-sized puncture hole in the lower oil pan cover. My guess is the forklifts at the auction yard set the car down onto like a rock or something right there. The car is pretty low to the ground, so just a little bit of pressure on that cast aluminum cover popped a little crack and hole into the cover. That wasn't a big deal. Pulled the cover off, put the new one on, filled the car back up with oil. Thankfully, the car wasn't really ran with oil in it, most likely. It still had a decent amount left in it from when I initially pulled the dipstick out. But yeah, so that started the repair saga, and then from there it went on to having to replace the front impact bar because that was bowed in a little bit. Thankfully the frame rails were in great shape. They weren't tweaked at all or anything like that. And then of course most recently the saga of replacing the entire front subframe, so dropping basically the entire front end of the car out from the bottom, for replacing that subframe that was cracked, and then also replacing the harmonic balancer that was wobbling, but that really had nothing to do with the car being in an accident. That could happen to any car regardless of mileage or how mint of condition it's in. So that's just kind of a quick summary of kind of where I started with this car and where I'm at now. I'm really happy with this car. I really did luck out, and I got a very solid car overall for the price I paid, especially considering where car prices are at in today's world. For those that also don't know, my initial plans for when and why I bought this car was to rip all of the body panels off and turn it into a vet cart, similar to what a lot of other people have done on YouTube and whatnot. But I quickly, as soon as I got the car and got it on the road again and driving, I was like, it's really nice having this thing as a normal car with doors and windows and something that I can lock and whatnot, and drive in the rain if it rains for whatever reason in SoCal here. So I quickly shifted away from doing the vet cart idea. That was a pretty ambitious thing, and I was like, I just want to build a really cool Corvette, kind of set it up for autocross and incorporate a lot of 3D printing because that's one of my other main passions and hobbies, into the build. So I really lucked out when I was initially looking to buy this car, and when the one that I bought ended up being in relatively good shape. The only body panels that really were damaged were the front bumper, the hood, and this fender. Other than that, the car was in pretty good shape. Anyways, the point of this video is to not do kind of like a detailed rundown of how much money I put into this car versus how much money I bought it for. The idea is for me is to kind of just go over some general points that you should consider and try to be aware of if you're looking at purchasing a car from an insurance auction online, especially one sight unseen. Because it's not for the faint of hearted, it's not for everybody, I promise you that. But if you have the willpower, the ambition, and the motivation to put some like sweat equity into your project, it could be a really rewarding and worthy experience that will possibly save you a decent amount of money. Okay, so I've got a little list down here that I'm going to be kind of referencing to try and keep this video as timely and on track as possible, because I could probably ramble on for 45 minutes to an hour talking about all the things to consider when buying a car from an insurance auction. But to start, when you're looking at the idea of buying a car from an insurance auction website, it's a new thing, it's foreign to most people, it was foreign to me, I'd never done it. And the other thing that I'll quickly plug in there is that it was kind of a trend and a fad, and I mean it still kind of is, especially on YouTube with, you know, big name YouTubers buying really expensive cars like Lamborghinis and Ferraris and getting those for cheap from auction and then rebuilding them. It's not always as truthful and as clear cut as they make it seem. So that's why I wanted to make this video, because so you'll know what you're getting into, at least have a better idea of what you're getting into when doing this, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You get a car for cheap and you're good to go. So what are the first things to consider? So at the auction, when you've signed up, you created a profile on your auction site, the highest bidder price that you click on or enter to win the car is not what you're going to pay. There are other fees associated with purchasing the car. There's an auction fee. I don't know what it is roughly. I think it's maybe about 5% of the winning bid price. And then the other thing that I wasn't aware of that you have to be mindful of is that as a private individual, someone who doesn't have a license for like a dealership or a repair shop or a dismantler license, you can only bid on cars in certain states yourself as an individual. If you bid on cars in certain states like California and a bunch of others, you will have to go through a broker, which that will add extra fees. So states that don't require a broker are Montana, that's why I bought this car from Montana, Arizona, Texas, Oregon. That was all the ones on the kind of west to kind of central coast, or central coast, west coast to central United States, because I obviously didn't want to pay to ship a car all the way across the US. Still had to pay for shipping, which was another cost, to ship the car down here from Montana, because I didn't really have the means to go pick it up myself. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is when you purchase these cars from insurance auctions, there's no clear-cut like financing unless you have a special lender set up, which I don't know of any lenders that will lend you. I mean, unless you take out a personal loan, which has a high interest rate, yada, yada, yada. So most of the time you're going to be purchasing these cars with cash in hand. So keep that in mind as well. The other thing too is there's several things, like especially if you're looking at a car sight unseen, there's a lot of like different kind of parameters that are associated with each car listing. And one of them is the status of the car. So one, it's called an enhanced vehicle. Stay away from that. That means there's a lot of complications. One is that the car starts, so that's okay, but the best situation you want to try and do is that go for cars that say run and drive. Now that doesn't mean that the car will start up and go through all the gears and go down at freeway speeds. That means the car will start, go into first gear, drive forward, go into first gear, drive forward, go into reverse gear, and drive backward. But that's the best possible situation to set yourself up for. The other thing to quickly consider is if you are far away from where the car is located, like I was, you could hire a private inspector to go look at the car for you, and you could give them a list of points to look at. They might be able to send you pictures, etc., etc. That's a service that you can book through these auction sites. When I got this car, the auction was so close to when I found the car, I didn't have time to do that, so I had to go off the Carfax. So again, on to the next point, and this is rather obvious to some, maybe not so obvious to others. You might get surprises with these cars. In fact, it is most likely you will get surprises. Whether they're small or big surprises, you don't really know. For me, I've kind of had a mix of surprises with this car. I knew the car had some decent front end damage here. That was no problem. Didn't know about the oil pan from the auction listing and didn't know about the subframe. So that was definitely 2 points that I had no idea about with this car when I bid on it. So you will get surprises with this car or with cars from the auction sites, so just be prepared when you're going through the car once you get it delivered or once you pick it up. If you're now just seeing it for the first time, that you might have to replace some parts you weren't anticipating on or put a lot of extra time into the car. Okay, so the next point to consider, and this really applies to kind of sports cars, performance cars, and if you've got the budget, the exotic and luxury cars. So a sum of a car's parts are more than the actual car itself. So if you went to a new car lot and you bought, let's just say, a Toyota Tacoma right off the lot, MSRP about, oh geez, in today's market, I don't know, let's just say $40,000. Well, if you pulled every part off that car and parted that car out, all those parts alone, separately, are gonna sell for way more than $40,000. So keep that in mind, especially depending on the type of car you're buying. Obviously, European cars, parts are gonna be more expensive. The Corvette, sometimes parts are more expensive because this isn't a car that shares a lot of parts with other cars or more economical cars, and especially exotic cars. I mean, every time you see a YouTuber buy a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or you name your exotic car, I mean, a headlight might cost you $4,000. Granted, I don't know how much some of these cars go for the final bid price, but parts can be expensive. Next thing to consider. One of the most expensive items when repairing or rebuilding a car is labor, and that's where you come in. So your labor is what's going to really save you money. So your time is definitely money in the situation with a project car. So if you buy a project car with the idea of going to a repair shop or a mechanic to have all the work done for you, unless you have special connections with them or it's a buddy shop or family shop and they'll work with you for free or give you a really good discount, it's going to be really expensive to have the whole car repaired, depending on how severe the damage is, at a repair shop. So just for instance, to replace that whole subframe and the harmonic balancer at a repair shop, because I did look at possibly doing this because that was way outside anything I'd ever done on a car, way farther I've ever gone into a car before, that would have cost me probably about $2,500 to $3,000 to do. Now I paid $5,000 for this car, so you can see how quickly things can add up with certain damage, especially stuff that you don't anticipate on seeing and whatnot. So go into this project expecting to put in labor yourself. If you don't have the skills or you're unfamiliar, that's okay. I mean, you know, obviously be reasonable, but be going into this project with the idea that you're going to challenge yourself and you're going to learn, because there are so many things when I was working on this car, even recently here, that I had no idea how to do before. So very similar to if you're a homeowner, you can buy yourself a fixer-upper, which helps you get into the housing market or get into a house at a much lower price, but you're going to have to expect to put in a lot of, you know, sweat equity, elbow grease, you name it, into the house, or in this case, you know, your car, to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, your costs are going to very quickly add up simply because of how expensive usually hourly labor is. Okay, so the next point, and again, some of these points may be more obvious than others. I'm trying to address a wide range of people here that have maybe not so much experience, background, and awareness with what comes in buying a car that needs some work on it. So another thing to consider is throughout this project, I've had to buy a lot of tools that I didn't already have that would allow me to work on this car myself to save myself the money. The big one being those quick jacks. So for those that don't know, I have a set of quick jacks. So it's like a hydraulic lift system that slides underneath each side of the by the rocker panel of the car, lifts the car up. Way better than doing things on jack stands, although, you know, jack stands are great for certain applications, but in the case of replacing that subframe on the car, I definitely needed those quick jacks to get the car up high enough to to make the car really stable and safe to work under while I was dropping the whole cradle out while holding the engine from the top. Those cost about $1,500, but again, that job would have cost me about $2,500 to about $3,000 to have a shop do it. So it saved me money regardless there. But just expect to have to buy some tools that you didn't already have, obviously depending on how many tools you already have in your garage and your tool arsenal. And again, another maybe obvious or not so obvious thing, you are gonna need a space to work. Depending on how severely damaged your car is and how comfortable you are, depending on your living situation and whatnot, you might have to either work on this car in a parking lot at an apartment complex, or I'm thankful enough to have a place with a garage, so I do all my work in the garage here. Or sometimes you can take the car to a place, take your car to a buddy's house, so it helps to have connections and people with different tools and things that can help you along the process. But that's just something to consider as well. The other thing too to consider is sometimes, I know on military bases, there's places where you can go where you can basically rent a garage or a lift space for a somewhat low hourly rate, so you can have a full-on lift to work on the car. So that's something to consider too. The other big thing, and I've had this thought many times here, is depending on how many parts that you have to buy for the car and whether or not you want to go aftermarket parts, stock, how available the parts are, etc., etc. Once you're all said and done and you have the car back to a good working condition, that car might end up costing you more money than what a normal car would have cost that wasn't in an accident that you could have bought used and possibly taken a loan out on. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know exactly where I'm at with kind of how much money I put into the car versus how much the car would be worth, or how much a similar car without an accident would have cost me to buy. But again, it all goes back to, this is a project that is challenging you, teaching you new skills, and giving you a really cool experience that once you get the car back on the road and running is very rewarding. I mean, driving the car now, knowing that I replaced the whole front end of the car, is a very empowering feeling and gives me a lot of, kind of confidence when I go to work on the car and other cars in the future. So the amount of experience that you will gain is going to be, it's not something you can put a dollar value on, but that's where sometimes you might lie, depending on how many parts you got to buy and how expensive they are. At some point, I definitely do want to go through, and because I do have an Excel sheet kind of where I track all my expenses with this car, and I want to see kind of where I'm at. I haven't checked that in a while since being so involved in replacing the subframe, but it's something that I definitely want to do. So I took a quick break to go eat some dinner, but let's get back to it. So I think I was just talking about how the car that you buy from an auction, a project car, might cost you more money in the long run versus the total money invested into buying a somewhat mint car, taking a loan out on it, etc. But this car is going to give you something that you can't put a dollar figure on. That is experience and a lot of good challenges that will just teach you good problem solving skills, good mechanic skills, and it'll just be fun. It's all about the journey, right? That's kind of what a project is. It's the journey, not the end experience. Although I am very much so looking forward to the day where I can just take this thing out on a weekend or take it to work on a Friday and really enjoy it. That's what's kind of driving me to get it back into a solid running and driving condition. So just keep that in mind. You're gonna have to put work into the car. It also, buying a car from auction like this might allow you to get into a car that you might not otherwise be able to afford. Now, I could have very easily gone in and found a car, a C5 Corvette with similar miles, 6-speed, and taken a loan out on it, right? But older cars like this, this is a 20-year-old car, you're going to have a higher interest rate. Not as many banks want to take out or give loans out for old cars. And then you have a monthly payment. The nice thing about this car is I don't have a monthly payment on it, aside from whatever parts I have to buy that month for the thing that I'm working on. But it's really cool just having this car, not having any type of debt associated with it. I own it. I've got the title in hand. So that is a cool thing about it. Just keep that in mind. If you buy a car that is slightly above your means, you might be able to buy the car, but then keep in mind all the parts that you have to buy might cost more. So that's where you might run into some trouble. But in the long run, if you play it smart, it's a cool way to get a car for a little bit less, as long as you're willing to put the time and effort into fixing it up. And I guess the last thing I want to mention, I never looked at buying a flood car. Flood cars are very high risk and high reward. So sometimes you can get a flood car and everything will work just fine depending on the water level. And other times you get a flood car and every electronic piece in the car is shot and damaged and needs to be replaced, which as cars, as all of you know, as cars got newer, more electronics, more things to be damaged from a flood. So I never looked at flood cars, but if you're looking at a flood car, just know that they are high risk but high reward depending on, you know, how badly it was flooded. So that's kind of just my overall summary and overview and take on buying a project car from a salvage insurance auction. You gotta have the right mindset, you gotta have the right attitude, and you gotta go into it with knowing certain things and having expectations, knowing that you might uncover things that you didn't see in the auction listing, and you know, it might take you a lot more time and money and effort and XYZ things to get it back on the road. So just know that you're going into it for the experience, and if you get a really good car for a little bit less than what you normally would, that's a bonus. So just keep that in mind. I know a lot of YouTube channels like to make it seem like you can go get a Lamborghini for $20,000, and while that might be true, you could get the car for $20,000. It needs $100,000 in parts and repairs. So there's a little bit more under the skirt than what some people portray on their YouTube videos. So with all that being said, I hope you guys found this somewhat useful, resourceful if you're looking at buying a project car like this. I always got asked questions as the build went on, do you still feel like it was worth it? Especially after the recent job of, you know, my neighbors and my friends and family who saw how deep I was into the car. They were asking, like, is it still worth it? And, you know, you got the car for that cheap? And I say 100% yes. It's given me a lot of really good learning experiences. So got to have the right attitude and mindset if you're going to buy a salvage auction car. If you guys have any comments or questions about my experience and maybe some other things that I didn't touch on in the video, please feel free to leave a comment below and I'll be happy to do my best to answer that for you. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe for more. The next to do on this car is the water pump. So I found the water pump leaks a little bit after getting the car started again for the first time. So I just got all the parts in the mail. So we're going to be doing that soon, and then I got a few 3D printing videos coming up as well. So thanks again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and other than that, I will see you in the next one.